Tech by Tips.
Welcome to another Tech by Tips video. In today's video, just like I promised before, we're going to cover how to set up the Invoice Ninja application. And on this specific video, we're going to talk about using Docker inside our Windows machine to run the application. And for that, we're going to be using the Docker Compose file that is given by Invoice Ninja in their Docker files repository. And we're going to cover how to use that Docker Compose file to have an instance of Invoice Ninja running inside our Windows machine, not using it as a server per se, just like a container running in our computer. So let's get to that. The first thing that we need to do here is we need to follow the instructions that are given here in this Get Started with Docker Compose. And the first thing that it tells us is that we need to clone this repository because we're going to be using those files, right? So the first thing we need to do is either do a git clone, or you can come up here to the repository where it says code and you can download it as a zip file too if that's what you want. So in my case, I'm going to put this in the C drive of my computer just to make it easier to find. So I'm going to have a command prompt here and I'm going to run that to get that repository. And let's first check that we have that, and as we can see, that's in there. We have the files that are necessary, so now we can get into that directory that says Docker files and we can see what we have there, and we can see the Docker Compose file here, which is the crucial main thing that we need, and the environment file that is going to be using information that we provide for how we want our application to run. So let's clear this out. We know that we have that there, right? So the next thing that we're going to do is, according to this, we have to go into the environment file and we have to set up some environment variables. So for these variables are going to be the app URL and the app key, and then any other variables that are in that file, right? So let's go into that file and see what it has. So if I go into the folder that contains that repository and I say I want to edit the environment file, and then we'll see what's in this file here that the application came with. And then we need to identify what we're going to put in here. Okay, the first thing that we see here is it asks us for an app URL. And in our case, this is going to be irrelevant because we're not exposing this to the public internet. We're just running this locally in our computer. But if you were to run this and you would be exposing this to the public internet, then you would have to put your domain here that you specify for that. For example, invoice.mydomain.com, something like that, right? And then after that, we have to create an app key. And the app key is something that is necessary according to their documentation. So we're going to be following their documentation for generating an app key. And then we're going to put that in here. Fortunately for us, if you go into their Docker Hub page for Invoice Ninja, then you have this section here that says generate an application key, and it tells you how to get that application key generated using Docker. So that's pretty easy. We just run this command and then we'll put that information there. So let's just copy this command for now. And then we're going to go into our command prompt, and then we're just going to run that to generate that key. So then it's going to pull the image of Invoice Ninja because I did not have that in Docker. So now once it pulls it, I'll see it here. And then it's going to run that container to generate that key that we want. And just like that, we can see that we received that application key that we need for that was generated by the Invoice Ninja container that ran. And then if we go into our Docker, we can see that now we have the Invoice Ninja image downloaded and the container was terminated, so it's no longer there. Let's grab that application key, copy that, put it into our file. So that goes in there and we save that. And then in this option that says app debug true is if you want to see extra details of what's going on in the application when it's running. It's good if you're trying to troubleshoot something, but for normal use of the application, this probably should be turned to false because it's going to just put so much extra stuff into logs that you don't really need and might affect the performance of the application. So I would say just switch this to false and save that. Alright, so additionally, we have this option here that says require HTTPS, and it's currently set to false. I'm going to leave it set to false because that's going to be local to my machine. It's not going to be currently exposed to anything But if you're gonna actually deploy this as a service that is gonna be accessible to people and that you're gonna receive the payments and all of that, then you should have some sort of HTTPS connectivity. I would probably say instead of using Docker to do that, it would be better maybe to have it in a Kubernetes cluster, or maybe on a machine directly, and then you expose that machine to the public internet, and then you use something like Let's Encrypt to get that certificate and apply that to the connection so that everything's secure. But for now, for this sample, I'm not going to enable it. I'm just going to leave it as false. It's going to be local to myself. The next thing that we can see here, it says Phantom PDF generation false. So this is using Phantom.js, which is a way to generate PDFs, but that also has some restrictions on the amount of PDFs that you can generate, and you have to have a license for that. And I'm not going to be using this for this video, so I'm just going to leave it at false. But if you're expecting to get a lot of PDFs generated by billing a lot of people, then it'll be beneficial to you to actually get a license for that and then enable this, so then you can use that. And then to generate the PDFs, it's using Snap PDF as the backend way of generating the PDFs. There's nothing to change here, just leave it like it is, honestly. And then in trusted proxies, it says everything. And then for a queue connection database, we probably should leave that alone. The documentation, as you can see here, doesn't really talk a lot about that. So since it doesn't give us a lot of information, we're just going to leave it as it is. So let's continue. What else do we have here? We have the information for the database. So this is how we're going to set up the database that Invoice Ninja is going to use as a backend to store all the information. And then you're going to put here so that Invoice Ninja can actually connect to the database. You obviously don't want to leave the defaults here. Change the username and the password at least, and then that's going to make it more secure. And then when you set up your database, make sure that when you create the database, it has the same username and password information so that it is able to connect to the database. So the next thing that we have here is to create our initial administrator user, basically. So then we have to put an email here, and let's just put me@me.me, and then a password here. So for now it's going to be very secure. It's just going to be password, and that's what you're going to be using as your master user for the application, right? So once you define that, that's what you're going to use to log in. And then after that, you have here what it says mail options. This is a way for you to specify the SMTP server that Invoice Ninja is going to use to send your emails out, right? Normally, if you're in a company, you have your own mail server, and then you just put that information there, which would be your SMTP server. And usually it has some port and a DNS name that points to that server. It has a username and a password if you want to use encryption, and then what's the address that is going to be sent as the sender, and then the name that is going to be used as the sender for those emails. So that's information that you have to specify. I'm not going to be using this, so I'm not going to change anything. But you could, for example, use Google's SMTP server or Outlook's SMTP server, and then I think the port you would use is 587, because by default the port 25 is blocked by most ISP providers if you're not a business. If you are a business, then you'll be good. You will have access to 25 to send stuff out. But yeah, this is where you put all that information. I'm not going to change anything because I'm not going to use it, honestly. And then here on the MySQL section, so the MySQL section is actually the setup information for the database. So remember, we said here we're going to have a username and a password and a database name that we're going to connect to. Here's where we set that database up. So here's where you put the username for that database, and then the password for that root user, and then a password for MySQL and the database that you're going to be using, right? So the MySQL password is the one that you would actually put here. So the root password is usually never used. You don't want to use the root account for stuff. So just make sure that you put something here that is very hard to guess and you don't actually use it. And then you just use the user and the password that you specify here. I'm going to leave it as it is, so it's going to connect. But in your case, you have to change this information, okay? And then the last thing that we have here is, if you see it says v4 environment variables, that's talking about if you're using Invoice Ninja version 4 we're not going to be using version 4, we're using version 5, so we just ignore this, we leave it commented out, and we don't care about this part. So that's the changes that you make basically to the environment variables file, and you change this according to your need. And basically the thing that I wanted to change here mainly is the application key, because we didn't have that and I showed you how to generate that, right? But the rest is just left as default. You obviously don't want to leave it as default, especially if you're going to expose this to the internet. So I X out of here because we've already made the changes. Let me clear this out. So the next thing I want to do is I want to actually go over the Docker file. Let me open this with Notepad again. So that we can see what we're going to do here, right? It's going to be creating several things. There's services here. So there's the server that is Nginx. Nginx is a web server basically, but it has many other uses, right? And it has some specific configurations for it. So it says that we're going to be running on port 80, which is HTTP or not secure, right? And it has a network that is going to connect to, which is going to be the Invoice Ninja network, and it's going to specify an IP for a host, right? And then that's one of the things that we have, but then we also have an application being deployed, and this application that is going to be deployed is the actual Invoice Ninja container that we were looking at in Docker Hub, and that tells the container to use the environment file that we just edited to grab all the configurations that it needs to run. It's always going to restart if something happens and it stops responding. And then here it specifies also volumes that we are going to map to that container. So we have a hosts file, we have an application public folder, an application storage, the PHP initialization file, and the PHP CLI initialization file. So all of that's going to be mapped to this container. So we can make those changes to those things outside of the container. And then it tells us that this container depends on having a database. So that means that this container is not going to run until our database is up. And it runs on the Invoice Ninja network too. So all of this is going to be connected in a network. And it also has a specification of an IP and a host. So that's for the application part of it. And then here's where it defines the actual database that it's going to use. And it's going to be using MySQL 8 for this database. And in this case, this is going to be running on an x64 system, not on a Raspberry Pi. So we leave this part commented out. And then it's going to use the usual MySQL ports, which is 3305 mapped to 3306, always restarting also. And it's going to be using the environment file for the configuration of the MySQL database. It also maps a volume here for the data of MySQL to the container, so we can see that outside of the container. And here's other things that you can actually configure if you want, but I'm going to leave them commented out because right now it's irrelevant for this video. And it's going to be connected to the Invoice Ninja network, so everything is going to be connected to the same virtual network. It's going to be having an IP address and a host name, and that's all that we need to make sure that is configured for version 5. If you were to be running version 4, then there's other stuff that is here to be configured for that, but that's irrelevant to us. So now we know what we're going to deploy is 3 different containers that are going to have different parts of the application, and all the configuration is going to come from that environment file that we created previously, and we should be good to deploy this application now. Okay, so now we should be able to run this. First of all, I'm going to make sure that I am in the location where all those files are, so I can see the Docker Compose file here, so that's great. And now we just have to run the magic command that gets all of our stuff created. So we tell Docker with the Docker Compose up and D to read our Docker Compose file in the folder that we're currently at, and then deploy all that infrastructure that is defined in there. So let's run that, and then we'll see that it's pulling all of the other images that I don't have. So that'll be MySQL, Nginx, and we can see that Nginx is already here. And when that's done pulling all of that, then it'll start creating the containers. So we can see we have Nginx now, MySQL, and Invoice Ninja. So that's looking good. Now it started creating things. So you see container Docker files db1, so it's creating that container. it already created the network Invoice Ninja, so that's done. So we just have to give it time. It's going to take its sweet time to do all these things. It's going to show you created and started and all that. So now we have our network. It was created. We have our container for the database. It's already started. We have our container for the application that is started, and we have the container for the Nginx server that it's started. So if we go into our containers here in Docker, we'll see that there's a thing that says Docker files, and if we open this, we have all those 3 different containers there that we should see running our application. So this is letting me know that if we see here that this is our database server, the MySQL 8, and it's using the port 3305 and 3306. So this is to store the data. This is the application that is going to be doing the things in the background. So like our middleware, let's sort of say. And this would be like our user interface where we get access to the actual application. And as you can see, the container is listening on port 80 and it's expecting communication from port 80. So if I click here, it's going to do a mapping on my local machine to this container so that I can access that. So if I click here, then it's going to open here, and then we can see Nginx. So we're hitting that Nginx server without any issues. So another thing that I want to do is, now that we saw that we got that page from the web browser, I just want to make sure that everything is running properly here in the all the different containers, right? So if I click on the server, which is the Nginx container, and I look at the logs, I can see that it says that everything's ready, it's waiting for connections, and then it can see that connection that we just made from our local machine, asking for stuff, right? So it is getting that information, that request from our local machine. And if I go into the app and I look at the logs, it tells me that all of the things related to the database were set up properly, and everything is ready to run. And we see that it has jobs that it performs, and it tells me how long it took to do a job. So everything looks fine over here. And if I go into the, something happened here. There we go, no schedule commands ready to run. It looks like it was running again on a schedule. And if we go into the database, we can validate here that the database is running on the appropriate port and it's accepting connections. So everything is looking good so far when it comes to the containers, right? So now, to access the user interface, we're going to put that information that we put here in the file, which is in.localhost, but we're not going to specify a port. We're just going to put the in.localhost, and that should take us to the user interface. And if we go to just the localhost, we still see the welcome to Nginx, so everything's working. And now we should be able to log in using the credentials that we specified on the environment file. And then we go here and password. And then when we click login, now it tells me that the credentials did not match our records. Oh, I see what's going on. I was in the wrong login because I was logged in as a client of ours. So that's not where I should be logging in. So instead of putting in.localhost/client, I just have to put in.localhost, and that'll take me to the actual owner portal, which is this one. And this is where I would be logging in with the appropriate credentials that I set up in the environment file. In this case, it's optional, so we leave that alone and we log in. And now we're finally inside the Invoice Ninja application, and now we have to set up the information for our company. So in this case, I'm just gonna say Tech by Tips, for example, and we're gonna be using US dollars and in English. Save that, and now we have the Invoice Ninja application actually running and accessible to us. So that's how you install Invoice Ninja locally to your computer so that you can use it. And the point of this is just that you can use the Docker Compose file to deploy this using Docker, just for you to test it and try it. If you're actually gonna host it using Docker, then I would suggest that you build a server for this, and then that server is behind firewall, etc., connected properly to the public internet using Let's Encrypt, and then you can make this application accessible securely to the internet. But yeah, this was it. I just wanted to show how to set it up using the Docker Compose file. I'll probably set up another video on how to do the setup in another way, but this is going to be it for this one. It's already a pretty long video, So I'll see you on the next one. Thank you very much. Remember, if you like the content, like the video, subscribe to the channel if you have not done so. That helps us a lot to grow. Share the videos if you find them useful with people that might benefit from them. And write down in the comment section below what you would like to see featured in the channel, and comment out about the things that you see in the videos. And that's gonna be it. I'll see you on the next one. Take good care.